Welcome to Digital Marketing This Week. It's episode 33. This one is a beginner's guide to Google Tag Manager. It's one of my favorite tools, so I'm actually pretty happy to be able to explain this one to you. It's brought to you by Seriously Simple Marketing over at seriouslysimplemarketing.com. Of course, any questions you have, you're just starting out in digital marketing, it's a great place to get some good beginner's advice, and maybe you find a little something for the intermediate people out there too, if you have a little bit of experience. My name, of course, is Chris Mercer. I'm analytics and optimization. Also do the content for Seriously Simple Marketing and host of Digital Marketing This Week, and you just call me Mercer. Now, this focus topic, again, Google Tag Manager. So if it's not a tool that you have heard of, you will want to hear about this. So hopefully this is something that you have heard of, but if not, take a look. Just kind of, be a little bit curious, and I'm going to go over kind of this 30,000 foot overview about it, just to hopefully pique that curiosity if you don't already have it. And if you do have it and you've played around with Tag Manager, you're just not quite sure how it works or what the point is, or you've heard about it but weren't sure how it fits in the bigger picture, hopefully this episode will help you out. All right, now, real quickly before we dive in, if you are watching this on a YouTube video somewhere, or you're listening to it on a podcast, we do have what we call the Insiders Club. It's completely free to join. All you need to do is go to seriouslysimplemarketing.com and you'll see a place to sign up. Now, the benefit of that is you get to join us live. So we actually record these in sort of a live studio audience. Of course, the audience is scattered all over the world, but what we'll do is we have a chat room in there, and so people can ask questions during the episode, and they can go through and, again, ask everything. And what we'll do is after we cover this sort of content, right, I sort of jump down off the virtual stage, so to speak, and then we have a discussion, and we can go over the different questions people have, whether it's about the topic that we covered, or it might just be about something about digital marketing in general and different tools, so we'll go over those as well. So it's a great place to get some help and to kind of chat and learn some things. And again, completely free service that we provide. All right, now your goal, as always, is to get one idea, act on that one idea, and then repeat the process. Google Tag Manager can be overwhelming. There's lots of things in digital marketing that can be overwhelming. Google Tag Manager, of course, because it's kind of googly, and you'll see what I mean in a second. Google makes incredible tools, but they're just very, sometimes difficult to use in terms of their user experience. They're not that intuitive. But when you kind of get an idea of the lay of the land, it becomes a lot easier. So just take one little thing, get that down, get your head wrapped around that, and then come back and do the next thing. All right, so why should you care about this week's topic, Google Tag Manager? Well, today we're going to talk about a basic understanding of what it is. So if you've always wondered but weren't quite sure, again, how it fit in the bigger picture, you're going to hopefully get that. I'm going to show you how to set up your Google Tag Manager. It's actually very simple. And I'm going to show you a cool trick. So Google Tag Manager is all about the cool tricks. There is some serious flexibility and some power that you have when you use Google Tag Manager that is, you technically have it. You can do these things other ways, but Google Tag Manager makes it so easy. So I'm going to show you one of those. And the trick we're going to show you is how to lower your bounce rate on your sites. So of course, we'll probably cover a few other things as well. So let's jump in. A beginner's guide to Google Tag Manager. All right, so the very first thing we need to talk about is what is a tag manager, right? So where do these whole things come from, and why did Google develop this? Well, and first of all, I do want to say there are other tag managers. So there's different ones out there that are private. You can go out and buy, and some enterprise companies use. Google created their own, right? So what a tag manager is essentially it's all about enterprise. It was about big business, right? So big business needed a way for the marketing department to communicate with the IT department. And what they were doing is marketing would say, okay, let's use a Facebook pixel, right? So they set up a conversion pixel for their campaign in Facebook, and they need the conversion pixel placed on a particular page for it to trigger conversion. So you do that, you want to go to your IT department, you go enter in a help desk ticket, because remember, we're talking enterprise, right? Big two different departments. It's not like one person runs across and talks to the other person. So there's these systems they have to go through. They type in the help desk ticket, IT goes through, they don't like miscellaneous code on their pages, and so they got to make sure the code's right and that it's not going to affect anything, and do a bunch of testing. And the challenge with the IT department, it's not a bad thing, it's a challenge for the IT department. It takes time, it takes lots of time. And so what ends up happening is IT department goes through, they set up the pixel, they finally get it placed, and then it ends up being like 2 weeks after the campaign ended, because it just takes too long. And so that's where marketing department plus tag manager, right? And so then Google Tag Manager, this is the solution. What Google Tag Manager is, it's actually made for the marketing department to use. And so what happens is IT places a little snippet of code, basically just like you would with analytics, with Google Analytics. You would take a little snippet of code that is Google Tag Manager code. You put that on all of your pages. And then what happens is marketing can go into Tag Manager, which is a separate program. They go into this Tag Manager, and they can then control all the different pixels from there. It's kind of like this marketing dashboard for conversions and tracking. It really is a powerful tool. And I'll show you that in the episode a little bit later on here. So I'll show you ours so you can see how it operates and what it looks like. So a really, really powerful tool. And so basically marketing departments, when they're going to go do a Facebook pixel on a certain page and they want to place that Facebook pixel, they don't have to go to IT anymore. They log into the Google Tag Manager. They say, here's the pixel, place it on this page, and that's it. And Tag Manager takes care of the rest. And it's automated. And IT doesn't even know it's happening. They don't even care. So really, really amazing service. And that's essentially what a Tag Manager is for. So if you have challenges placing code on your pages because you're always going back and forth to your developer to get stuff done, with Google Tag Manager, you will no longer have to do that. So you go back to your developer, you tell them to put Tag Manager code on, and then you can start controlling your pixels from Tag Manager. So I hope that makes sense. And of course, if it doesn't, feel free to pop in any other questions and we'll go from there. Okay, so that's sort of the essence of what a tag manager is. So let's talk about what a tag is, right? So you're managing tags. What are tags? Well, tags can really be anything that is tracking and conversions related. So you've got Google Analytics, that could be a tag, right? So you drop your Google Analytics conversion pixel. You could use AdWords for the same thing. Google Analytics has their own pixel, or AdWords has their pixel. It could be an HTML pixel, kind of like this. Now this is an example of what a Facebook pixel might look like, but all sorts of pixels exist, and you get tracking code for all of your different pieces of software, and that allows you to use even third-party analytics programs like Clicky, right? Clicky is a nice little web analytics tool. It's free to use. Can be a really good backup for your Google Analytics. And so with things like the ability to use third-party analytics even, right? So you don't have to use just Google Analytics with this. You can use anything with it. It's really an amazing tool, but that's what a tag is. All it is a piece of tracking code. So just think about it like that. It's very, very simple. It's just a piece of tracking code. And all you're doing with the tag manager is saying, here's my tracking code, please trigger it on these pages, right? Have it fire only on these certain pages. And you can make a rule up that says fire it on all the pages or just fire it on this particular page. So pretty granular as far as what the stuff is that you can do with it. All right, so without further ado, let's jump onto the fun part here. I want to show you a tour of Google Tag Manager. So give me a second, I'm gonna go ahead and bring this over here. So we've got the beeping horn, I don't know if you can hear that, but somebody's alarm's going off outside. Awesome. I'm gonna blow this up just a little bit. Okay, so there we go, one more, there we go. Okay, so this is our tag manager. Now, when you first come in, I'll show you where the snippets of code are. When you first set it up, there'll be a little setup process, but it's relatively simple. If you've gone through and you've set up your own Gmail account, or if you set up your own Google Analytics account, it kind of operates in the same way. So you'll probably make it through that just fine. It's pretty step-by-step, and they did a really good job of onboarding. But what happens when it is set up is you've got kind of two different sections. You've got the account section, which is what this is, right? So this is the account of TommyTrader, which is our parent company. So you've got TommyTrader, and then in here we have containers. So Google Tag Manager uses containers, and there's a separate piece of code for each one of the containers. So I've created one for our Seriously Simple Analytics, and this is for a different domain, and that's how we do it. So you have a different container, right, a different piece of code for each individual website, right? So I'm going to jump into our Seriously Simple Marketing website because that's the one we have the most tags on. So as we go through here, you've got, now we're in the container. Okay, now the very first thing I want to show you before we dive into all this fun stuff is I'm going to show you where the tracking code is. So this is it. You take this little snippet of code, again, just like analytics, right? You take this little snippet of code and then you combine it, you place it onto your page. Now, ideally, you place it in the body, and it says that right here. So you've got, directions as how to place it, but that's really it. There's nothing really more complicated than that. Put in your tag manager code and then go from there. A little bit later on, I'll show you a WordPress plugin that does it automatically for you, so it makes it a little easier. Okay, so let's go back into our container. So I'm just hit the container draft here. We go to overview, and I'm going to show you this. Now this might look a little complicated, so don't worry about it right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to show you Google Analytics. So what I did is I'm going to jump into this one first. And Google, this feels maybe a little more complicated than it really is because there's so many of them in here. But remember, we started, right, with just a few. Back when we were setting up our accounts, we did a few, and then we added more, and that's what makes it look like, oh my gosh, there's so much going on. There really wasn't. We just started with one and then added another and added another. You're going to do the same thing. Now, one of the first ones you're going to set up here is what they call, let me squeeze this over if I can. I don't know if I can. doesn't look like it. Nope. Okay. So here we've got the tag name, right? So you just put in whatever the label, pure label. Then you put in the tag type. Now look at all these different things that are built in, right? So these are all built in. If you use Google Trusted Stores, you could do that. Display ad tracking, you've got DoubleClick. You know, if you use DoubleClick or AdWords, it's all, you know, part of the display network. You've got remarketing tags that you can put on, ad rolls. There's all sorts of third parties that also integrate with this. But even if they don't, all you do is you do custom HTML tag. And that allows you to put in this little section down here. This would be like your Facebook pixels, right? So stuff like that. So what we do is we come through here, and I'm going to switch it back to where it was, which was we were doing Google Analytics, and we use Universal Analytics, as you should, because Universal Analytics is the newest one, and Classic Analytics is going to go away. So make sure you're using Universal Analytics. And then we come down here and you put in the tracking ID. Well, guess what that is? That's the Universal Analytics number. That's the UA number, right? Your account number with Google Analytics. So now I'm going to show you this a little bit later on. We actually did what we call a macro, which is basically setting up a variable. And you say, wherever you see this symbol, just put in our tracking ID, right? So this is a thing that makes analytics so powerful that you can do this. And then we can just, you know, you want to enable display advertising features? Great, done. Easy to go. Do you want to, you know, what do you want to track? Page view, an event. So when you, and again, this can feel a little complicated. If you don't know what event tracking is, don't worry about what I'm about to say. If you do know what event tracking is, you know what a pain it can be, because you have to go through and you have to code each individual link. And you have to say, okay, when they click this button, here's the event to report back. And you have to actually do that in the code. Well, with Google Tag Manager, you don't have to do that. And I'm going to show you how to track events. In fact, what we do is we track every single click that anybody ever clicks on an entire site. So it's pretty cool. And it took us, you know, about a minute to set up, like maybe even less than that. So in this case, we're just tracking a page view, report back a page view. You can change when it fires. You can set up cross-domain tracking. So this is a big deal, right? So you've got all these different cross-domain trackings you can set up. And you can just do that here. So if in our case, we want to track between Infusionsoft, which is our cart. So we say track between Infusionsoft.com and SeriouslySimpleMarketing.com. So we've got the ability to do that. And now our sessions won't break in Google Analytics. And if you've ever tried to do cross-domain tracking with regular analytics, sometimes it can feel a little overly complicated because you have to go in there and you have to change the different code on all the different pages. And then if you add another domain, you got to go back and redo it all. Well, now if you add another domain, no big deal. You just sort of add that domain in here. So, and there's a couple of other steps, but that's it. Like, it's very fast, very simple to set all this up, all right? I'm gonna go ahead and cancel this since I made a few changes. Actually, I'm gonna show you one other thing. One up here, firing rules. This is where you tell it when to do whatever the action that the tag was. So in this case, the tag is to track a page view. It's to ping Google Analytics and say, here's the URL that somebody is on right now, right? And then it sends over all the information as far as, you know, traffic sources and whatever else that Google Analytics reports. But the firing rule tells it when to do that. Okay, so you've got all pages in this case, right? It's a little thing that's built in. You just select all pages, and then it will basically place this code. It'll do this action on every single page in Seriously Simple Analytics. So that's sort of how this operates. I'm going to click back out here. So again, you've got the tags, right? So all these are tags. And this is just the piece of the action you want to have happen, right? Whether it's AdWords tracking or Clicky. In our case, you can see we've got Trial Fire, Session Cam, which does like video recordings. We've got Hotjar, we've got Heat Analytics, we've got Crazy Egg, we've got our Facebook conversion pixels, right? I promised I'd show you the events. I'm gonna show you events. So how you would do an event is this is just the label, right? It's Universal Analytics tag. We're going to be doing an event type. And what we do is we tell it, whenever somebody clicks, report back that it was an internal link. And for us, we set up the rule that says whenever they click on a link that contains Seriously Simple Marketing, right, we know that they're going from our site to another part of our site. And that's an internal link. An external link is when they would be going outside of our site to some other site, right? So then you could report that as an outbound link. And then report back what the URL is that they clicked on or that they were headed to, right? So which URL they were headed to. And then the element ID is like things about CSS you could report and all sorts of other stuff. So again, you can make this really technical, which I'm trying to avoid at this point because it's supposed to be a 30,000 foot overview. But if you are technical at all, and you're always tried to wonder, like, how do I get Google to report in this particular way or only report this but not that? It's probably Google Tag Manager is your answer, because you can do some incredible things with it. There's lots of flexibility and it is super powerful. And in this case, I'm going to show you the firing rule. What this basically says, again, this can feel complicated, but you know how you do this is you Google how to do event tracking with Google Tag Manager. Somebody's blog post is going to pop up and you copy it out, right? That's how we did it. That's how you start. It's super easy to do that. So when the event equals a GTM link click, which all this means is somebody clicked on a link and Google Tag Manager goes, oh, somebody clicked on a link. What am I supposed to do? And it says, okay, where did they go? They went to something that contains seriously simple. So that's an internal link. So then report it as an internal event. We have another rule that says when they click on a link, if it's not seriously simple, then report an outbound link. And it reports those into Google Analytics, into our Google Analytics account. So super cool, super powerful stuff. Now I'm going to show you, let me go back to the overview here. So 3 main sections. You've got your tags, which are what you want to happen, right? And that can be like something like a Facebook conversion pixel or Google Analytics or AdWords or countless other things that you could put on here. You do rules, which are defining the rules. It's just basically when it's going to happen. And another way to think about this, and Tag Manager is fortunately changing the way that they're doing this. This account hasn't been migrated over yet, but it will be. There's a new version of Tag Manager coming out where these are called triggers, which is exactly what they are. The rules trigger when the tag is supposed to happen. And then you've got macros, and macros are just variables. Now, in the beginning, if you're just starting out, you probably won't use these. The only one that we set up that we find we use quite a bit is this one that we started, which is here's our tracking ID, and this is it. And we put in our Google tracking ID. And this only saves us from having to type it in every time we set up a Google tag. That's it. That's all it does. And it replaces whenever we put in that variable, it just replaces it with our actual code. So that's an example of how you would use that. So again, tags are what you want to happen. Rules are basically triggers that say this is when it happens. And then macros are variables that you might use in your tags. So, but in the beginning, you probably won't use these a whole lot. And then once you're done, you basically publish. And once you publish, it pushes the changes live. Now, the cool thing, one of the cool things, I know I'm getting excited, but there's some really cool things. So these versions. So every time you publish, it will create a new version. And then we go through here and we put in, like, we just name the version different stuff so we can kind of get an idea of what we're working on. And now, why is this cool? Well, this is cool because if you publish something that for whatever reason breaks your site, right? You put a piece of code on there that breaks your site. Something doesn't load right. Something looks weird. So what you do is you just go back to the previous version and you make that live. And that's it. And all your changes are based, it's like a big giant undo version with unlimited versions. Unless you delete these out, they stay there. That's pretty cool. So Google Analytics or Google Tag Manager has taken care of something where the marketing, as a marketer, you can come in, you put something on your site and it doesn't work, or it makes the site load weird, or it interferes with some other piece of code on your site. And again, just something isn't working the way it should be. No problem. You go back and then you publish the previous version, the old version, right? You undo basically. And now you can debug, and take it. But meanwhile, your site isn't unaffected. And you can do that in about 30 seconds. Like, it's super fast to do all that. So that's kind of the general overview of Google Tag Manager. And again, if you have questions over that, I know that this is a lot, especially if it's new and you're not used to this particular topic. But if you are at all playing around with analytics, if you're a marketer who's frustrated because it takes you so long to put Facebook pixels on your pages, you would want to use something like Tag Manager, because it will save you a ton of time once you sort of get the initial idea of it down. And of course, the best way to do that is to set up your account, and it'll give you that little snippet of code, and then you place the code. So how do you place the code? Well, you could go to your developer. If you use a developer for such things, you can go to your developer and say, hey, place this code, on my site. Here are the directions how to do it, right? Just like you would with analytics or anything else. However, if you have a WordPress site, which I know many of you do, including us, you could use this. This is actually a relatively new plugin that has come out, but it's pretty cool. I like it. I like it a lot. They did a good job with it. It's called the Google Tag Manager plugin for WordPress. So very fancy name, but clearly it is what it says. So it is a Google Tag Manager plugin. So you put this plugin into your WordPress site, you put in your Tag Manager ID, and it automatically puts in the Tag Manager code and installs it, and then you can start tracking all sorts of fun stuff with Tag Manager. So we normally don't do a lot of customization with the plugin. We just have the plugin put the code on the site, and then we'll go back and use Tag Manager to do event tracking and all sorts of fun stuff that I was showing you that you could do. So that's essentially kind of what this what this plugin is. So again, real easy way to get your tag manager code on there. If you are a developer, if you're comfortable with code, just do it manually, because I think that's always the better way. We're not a fan of Google Analytics plugins because they sometimes can not update as fast as what Analytics does. And we may not be a fan in the future of Google Tag Manager plugins, but right now we are, because it's a very simple way for people to place code. But that being said, if you just need to place the code and you can do it in a body, so sometimes you go into your theme and the theme will say, place this code, you know, they go into your analytics and integration section of whatever your theme settings are, and you'll see a place where it says, enter this code in the body tag. So that's all you need to do. Just go in there, put in your code in the body tag, and Google Tag Manager will automatically be on your site. This particular plugin will also give you some additional features if you want to use it. It basically relates to something called the data layer, which is just a fancy way of saying like a data bucket, right? It just puts a bunch of stuff in the page that tells Google Tag Manager about the page. And that way, if you wanted to, you can report that stuff back into analytics. So that's a little deeper than I really want to go into here. But basically, the data layer is just a place to store information so that when Google Tag Manager needs it, it knows where to go. It goes to the data layer and it finds whatever information it's supposed to call. And as an example, e-commerce. So your e-commerce, in order to get it report into Google Analytics, you would put all the information in the data layer of the page, the confirmation page or the thank you page. You put it all in the data layer, all about the transaction details. And then you tell Google Tag Manager when an e-commerce transaction happens, so let's say when they land on my thank you page, then go report an e-commerce transaction. And what it does is it will look into that data layer and it will pull out any e-commerce data that it has and it will report that to Google Analytics so that fires there. So that's sort of how that whole thing operates. All right, so at the end of the day, Tag Manager is super powerful tracking, okay? Super powerful tracking. And before I go, I want to show one other quick thing, because I promised you I was going to show a bounce rate. So let me show you that. So this is some of the cool things you can do. Okay, so I have an event. Actually, this is a two-part tag, right? But this is what I mean by cool stuff. So there's a timer. We set up a timer event. So this is called a timer listener. Okay, just all it does is it starts tracking time. As soon as somebody loads a page, it starts tracking. And in our case, we did it for 30 seconds, right? So the event name is GTM timer, and then the interval is for 30,000 milliseconds, which is basically just 30 seconds. So after 30 seconds, it will fire back an event that says GTM.timer. This is all this tag does. Now, why is that cool? That doesn't seem like it's cool. Here's where it's cool. Then we do another tag that's an event tag. Okay, so Universal Analytics with our ID reports back to our Google Analytics. It fires an event. And it says timer 30-second users on page for at least 30 seconds. And this non-interaction hit is false. So basically what this means is trigger that there is interaction with the page. And this is how bounce rate is calculated. If somebody comes to your page and they scroll up and down a million different ways and they never interact, they don't click on anything, they read your entire blog post, they take notes on your blog post, and maybe they can be on your page for 10 minutes, and then they leave, right? Because they get all they could and they did, but they just never clicked on anything else. Google Analytics has to trigger that as a bounce. They have to report that as a bounce because they don't know, you know, there's nothing for them to measure against. There's no timing element for them to measure against. And so, you know, it triggers a bounce. And that's not really fair to you because it's not really a bounce. And so what we do is we force to have an interaction with the page. As long as the person is spending time on the page, and we could make this 3 seconds if we wanted to, but that's not really accurate either. But if somebody spends at least 30 seconds on the page, they probably are interested in something on there, right? 30 seconds is a lot of time. If you just sort of sit by yourself for 30 seconds, it's a lot of time. So when you go on the page and you're spending at least 30 seconds on the page, chances are you're poking around for something, right? There's some interest there. If it's less than 30 seconds, fine. We'll count that as a bounce. We would like to know that because that's useful for us on our engagement numbers. But what we did is we created this rule that says whenever an event fires called GTM.timer, right? Remember, this is what we did in the other tag. So whenever that happens, so after 30 seconds, it fires GTM timer. This rule says whenever GTM.timer comes through, then report this event into Google Analytics and make it trigger an interaction. So that now bounce rates go down. It's called the adjusted bounce rate is how you would do this. So our bounce rates report a little more accurately as to what's going on our site. And we know that, you know, people are spending time or they're not spending time, and it filters through. But again, this takes about a minute to set up. And that's it, and you're done, and it automatically starts tracking this stuff. You could, if you wanted to, have a timer that fires every 30 seconds, right? So you could tell how many times people are on it. You could set up a bunch of different timers, one that triggers after 5 minutes, one that triggers after 10 minutes. And that way you can see events, and then you can segment in your Google Analytics, show me the people who spend more than 10 minutes on the page, and what's their e-commerce results versus people who only spend 5 minutes on the page. There's a ton of stuff that you can do with this. And again, there's way too much for me to cover in even a series of episodes about Google Tag Manager. So I'm excited about it. You should be too. You should take a look at it. It is absolutely worth kind of getting your head wrapped around it, because again, at the end of the day, Google Tag Manager is incredibly powerful tracking. It's flexible. Believe it or not, it is easy to use, even though the interface is a little googly. They tend to get better with their interfaces as more and more people are using them, and more people are. Mostly because all the cool changes that come through with Google Tag Manager, things that are super hard to track, like sometimes you'll come to a website, or maybe yours is like this too, where your URLs don't change, but it's something called an Ajax refresh. But basically it's where you go to the page and the page loads up, and then maybe there's an exit pop and the page changes in the background, right? It changes when they stay on the page, but the URL doesn't change. Well, how do you track that in Google Analytics? Because Google Analytics, at least to Google Analytics the old way, it doesn't know there was a change. It doesn't know that they are now viewing a different page because the URL didn't change. So it just thinks you're on the same page. But with Tag Manager, there's something called a history event, which basically says whenever the browser changes something, right? Whenever the browser refreshes or changes something in the background, trigger that event. Now I know something happened, and you can report it back to Google Analytics. And so that stuff is very simple in Google Tag Manager. It is a little more complicated. You can still do it, but it's more complicated using traditional Google Analytics, and you would need a developer's help. But with Tag Manager, you don't necessarily need that. I mean, sometimes they're useful for sure. You know, some things you might need a developer's help on, but once it's set up, most of this stuff you can do as a marketer, and it is amazingly powerful. What was your one idea from this whole thing? Was it the fact that there is even this thing called Google Tag Manager, which is awesome. If that's where you are, that's perfect. So be aware of it. You don't necessarily have to jump into it, especially if you're new to analytics, because you want to get used to analytics a little bit first, and then you can kind of move into Google Tag Manager. It might make it a little easier for you. But still, the faster that you understand what Tag Manager can do, the easier it is for you to manage your own site, especially as your business scales out, because you'll be having other people do development for you. And as a marketer, you still want to have access to those pixels so that you can set up, Facebook pixels, or maybe you just want to give those access, for Facebook pixels to an agency or somebody who's doing your ads, right? So if somebody else is doing your ads, give them access to Tag Manager and let them install the pixels, So again, it's made for non-developers to use, even though I admit it looks a little googly, right? The interface is a little wonky, but that'll get better, I promise. Was it, how to install Google Tag Manager using the plugin, or just the fact you grab that little snippet of code and put it into your theme body? Was it the adjustable bounce rate idea? So that's kind of a cool trick to use. There's lots of cool tricks that you can use with Google Tag Manager. So adjustable bounce rate's a pretty cool one. But at the end of the day, right, as we always say, I'm always saying this, but it's an absolute fact, action brings results. So pick one thing, take action on it, and then from there, once you've sort of got a handle around it, go back, grab something else, take action on that, and make it your own. Because studying this stuff or just watching videos and then, maybe Google around about it, but then not actually opening your own Google Tag Manager account, not actually placing a Facebook pixel so you can get an idea of what it looks like. If you don't do that stuff, you're just not really going to get your head wrapped around it. And if in the beginning it feels very frustrating and overwhelming, that's how you know you're doing it right. That's how we were when we first started this thing. We're like, oh, like what exactly are they doing here? And then all of a sudden we're like, we went through it a few times. It's like starting with a bike, right? You're going to start to ride a bike. You can watch somebody ride a bike a million times. It doesn't make you a better bike rider. You still get on the bike and you fall off right away, even though you've seen it done a million times. And the reason is because you have to get a feeling for the balance, right? And that same thing is like that when it comes to Universal Analytics with Google Analytics, when it comes to things like Tag Manager, right? You have to get a feel for it. So take advantage of the fact that it is a free tool. If I didn't mention that, it's completely free. Thank you, Google. And so take advantage of this, learn this, because this will help you become a better marketer because you can do better tracking. Okay. enough about that. We're about to go ahead and jump into the insiders and call this episode a close. Now, if again you are watching this, I want to make sure that if this was a topic that's kind of interesting and you were like, man, I got some questions around this and I would love to ask them, you could if you were an insider. So just go to seriouslysimplemarketing.com, join the insiders list. You can join us live, and if you can't make it live, it's fine too, because we have a little questionnaire that you can fill out that we do just for the insiders, and we can go through and we answer the questions, and then the insiders get a complete recording of this episode. So most, if you're watching this again on YouTube or on the podcast, it's just a portion. This is just the content portion, right? It's a great portion, don't get me wrong, but it's not everything because you missed the Q&A that we have at the end. But again, the insiders get the Q&A as well. So I hope that encourages you to do that. If you are not already a member of our Insiders Club, again, just go over to seriouslysimplemarketing.com to sign up, and we would love to see you on the next episode. With that, I'm going to bring episode 33, A Beginner's Guide to Google Tag Manager, to a close. We're about to jump into the insiders room. Thanks again for everybody to joining us on the pre-recorded and on the podcast versions. And we look forward to seeing you on the future episode of Digital Marketing This Week.